Hi. Well, I think I'm fading into the castle. Oh, well. So here we are with Alexander Pope, our next to last week. And Pope's actually one of my personal favorites of the semester. I know that may be a rare opinion. Um, I know that Pope can sometimes seem a little difficult. But as I think with a lot of these Augustan age poets, we don't actually see enough of ourselves in them as I think we really ought to, right? Just kind of like what I said earlier. They, the English at this time are in a position not all that different from the United States of our own time. And with the same kind of bombastic nationalism, but also deep insecurities as well. And as is true in our time, satire is a huge deal, right? Alexander Pope really represents the culmination, the highest real achievement of this type of poetry. And I'm speaking particularly of the heroic couplet, which I first spoke about with John Dryden. Two lines of iambic pentameter rhymed together with an end rhyme. AA, BB, CC, DD, so forth, right? And so in the iambic pentameter, the heroic couplet, it's fair, I would say, to argue that Alexander Pope is the ultimate master of this form. Now, this form is structured and therefore limiting in certain ways, but that's what the poets liked about it. Okay. They found that the form and the meaning went together. A word I used before when I talked about Dryden, decorum, very important, right? That you use language for an appropriate genre. So, for example, when Pope writes Essay on Man, right, which is a somewhat serious, if you will, although there's certain hints of humor throughout, right? He uses pretty much elevated language. With the Rape of the Lock, which is comic, a heroic comic, he's playing with the idea of the epic, right? He uses a different sort of language, right? His English becomes a little more playful, if you will, a little more colloquial, if you will. He even engages in certain dirty jokes if you're careful enough to see them. I mean, they're not today's dirty jokes, which are not pretty hard to figure out, right? Alexander Pope, born 1688, so he's just a child when Dryden dies, does, however, follow in Dryden's model. And there's a real significance here. As the book tells us in the prefatory material, Pope was a Catholic. Not exactly surprised with a last name like Pope, right? Pope is an English Catholic. And as such, in this time period, Catholics were not allowed to go to the universities. They were not allowed into the highest levels of government and power. They were essentially a minority discriminated against. Pope, like Dryden, ultimately made his money writing. In other words, he was independent. This is a theme that we've been seeing in the last quarter of this semester, right? Writers starting to make their own make their own money from writing in a way that frees them up from having to worry about the politics of the time, or more accurately, allows them to say what they want about the politics of the time. Right? Dryden, as you recall, I mentioned that Dryden had done a translation of Virgil's Aeneid that my professor, when I went to graduate school, actually had a copy of that I got the pleasure to see. Pope did the same thing. Right, he translated classical materials, including ancient Greek materials like the Odyssey and the Iliad, sold them, like Dryden, through subscriptions. Right? In other words, people agreed to buy the book even before it was made. Right? This made Pope financially wealthy, independent. He made a lot of bucks. Well, pounds, pardon me. He made good money, which allowed him to be, well, quite frankly, he could say and write whatever he wanted, and basically no one could touch him. Right? The Essay on Man, the first of the two essays that I've asked, poems that I've asked you to read. The Essay on Man is a somewhat serious investigation of the great chain of being. Now, you should read Addison. Addison's piece is very short, right on the scale of being, because Pope didn't invent this philosophy, but he does argue for it. Okay? The idea being that everything in the universe has its place in this chain, right? You know how chains are links, right? Linked, link, 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 right? And there's these links that, first of all, begin with God, way, way up there. I've just lost my arm. Begin with God and go all the way down. Now, there's like an infinity amount of space between God and the next thing. And then angels, archangels, other kinds of heavenly creatures that we probably don't even know about, right? Then humanity, humankind has its level, and underneath it, the animal kingdom and so forth. And then you get down to like microbes, really small, disgusting things, and then radar fans down there, that kind of thing. Okay? So everything has its spot. And the important thing is to respect that spot. Right? Respect your place on the great chain of being. And the argument goes somewhat to the extent that what gets us in trouble, us being humans, and it's happened ever since Adam and Eve, is we want to be higher than we are. We want to be, like God, hence the temptation in the Garden of Eden, right? But it didn't stop with Adam and Eve, right? We continually do this all the time. We want to be higher up than we really are. And so the Essay on Man, in some ways, is really this investigation into the creation of the universe, and the rightness, right? It's the defense of the rightness of everything. So if you think, oh, why did God do this? Why does God do that? Why does God allow suffering? Why does God allow death? Right? Why does God allow horrible things to happen to children? Right? Why do evil people prosper and good people suffer? Right? Pope thought we just got to trust. We can't see it. Right? We don't know it because we're not God. Right? We do not know everything, and that's just the way it's supposed to be. Right? So as I look, for instance, at the beginning, awake, my St. John. By the way, that's St. John, not St. John. Awake, my St. John, leave all meaner things to low ambition and the pride of kings. So one of the things that Pope likes to play with is this notion of contrasts or paradoxes, right? That's how he's going to make his argument. Let us, since life can little more supply than just to look about us and to die. Now, don't take that as a negative. What Pope is saying is, hey, we're only here for a little while, and compared to all of eternity, all the time that there has ever been, a single human life isn't very long, right? So what do we expect to know? That kind of thing, right? Now, obviously, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I just want you to take a peek at it. But at the end of this opening stanza, I want to show this line. He says, Laugh where we must, be candid where we can, but vindicate the ways of God to man. Right? Now that is a very deliberate echo of Milton. Vindicate the ways of God to man. But Milton said, justify the ways of God to man, meaning to show the justice of God's ways. Vindicate suggests that somebody has been accused of a crime, of wrongdoing of some sort. And Pope is here to vindicate God, the ways of God. Okay? And apparently he feels that he has done so, because at the end of the essay, one of the all-time most optimistic pieces of writing, lines of writing ever written. In spite of pride, in erring reason's spite, one truth is clear, whatever is right. Whatever is right. Pretty hard to be more optimistic than that. Right? A lot of people have, shall we say, not exactly agreed with that. The Rape of the Lock is a very different sort of poem. It's funny. It's comical. He calls it heroic comic. And you should, I hope, make sure that you do, read the prefatory material, including the brief note to Mrs. Arabella Fermor, who is, after all, the star of the show. Right? And he talks about an incident that happened amongst some Catholic families, well-to-do Catholic families, of course, but nevertheless, they're, again, a minority, as I said. And you can imagine that when you're in a situation where you're in the minority and you're pretty much oppressed, the last thing you need is division amongst yourselves, right? The Rape of the Lock is kind of a humorous attempt to sort of put to rest some upset feelings, because a young man cut a lock of hair off a young woman at a party. Now, obviously, he shouldn't have done that. That's a very bad thing. No. But he turns it into this huge, epic battle, right? He uses the conventions of the epic, right? In other words, the kind of things that Homer and Virgil did. Epic question, catalog of heroes, journey to the underworld, right? All these things. And Pope plays into that with his language, but it's all very funny. You have to read it carefully. I know it's not easy the first time through. Okay. And again, it's one of those things where there's like a lot of footnotes. But remember, it's all meant in fun. Now, the most interesting aspect is that he takes this incident and makes it big by adding in what he calls the machinery. Fantastical imaginary creatures. Sylphs, gnomes, nymphs, and salamanders, which connect to the four basic elements of air, earth, water, and fire. The sylphs are, and all these machineries are basically, I don't want to use the word souls, but they're created from when women die. And whatever your personality type was the most, that's the kind of thing that they become, right? So the coquettes, right, the flirty, happy young ladies, I don't know why they would be dying, become sylphs. The gnomes are prudes, kind of unhappy, right? Those become the gnomes. They're connected to the earth, right? And so Pope, uses the machinery in much a way that's very similar to what happens in Homer if you read the Odyssey or the Aeneid, right? The gods of ancient Greece, or gods and goddesses, get all involved in humans, right? Well, the same thing kind of happens here, only they're more invisible, right? And so there's a lot of fun that can happen here. You just have to pay really close attention. Think about the main action, but just kind of enjoy the process. Card games, party, a young woman who is just beginning to, grow into her adulthood. Young men who are, like a lot of men, maybe a little overly aggressive. And something bad happens. Not too bad. But there you go.